First day on the job, new doctor's already dead. Welcome to the Time Treadmill. I'm Ron, and these are my sweaty thoughts about Doctor Who. This right here, the Twin Dilemma, is the beginning of the end of classic Doctor Who. It's the moment when the show crosses the Rubicon, never to return. And I don't say that lightly. Yes, the show will continue on for several more years, but among those several more years is an 18-month hiatus where the show very nearly was entirely canceled, never to come back. The changes are abundant, and frankly, none of them are for the better. Let's start with the new Doctor. I love Colin Baker as an actor, as a person, and I totally get what he was trying to do with the character. I think he was betrayed by the scripts, by the writers, by the producers. And the summation of all of that is a Doctor who is completely unlikable. This is noteworthy as being the only Doctor who ever actually physically tries to kill a companion. There's a scene early on where he tries to strangle Peri to death in a fit of madness. And yeah, it's because he's going through some kind of regeneration trauma and whatever. That doesn't change the fact that he is completely unlikable right out of the gate. He swings wildly from being egotistical to being violent to being incoherent to being childish and terrified. It's a chaotic performance that comes entirely from the script and not from Colin Baker himself. And truly, I do understand the producer's idea to change up the character, to try and create someone who is vastly different from Peter Davison's Fifth Doctor. And of course, ultimately, the Sixth Doctor will soften and become more likable, but never entirely. And as a side note, I'm going to have the exact same problem with the beginning of the 12th Doctor era, so stay tuned for that in a few months. But even setting aside the character performance, there are all of the visual changes to the show. Starting, of course, with the Sixth Doctor's costume, which is intentionally terrible and tasteless. It's the most god-awful costume ever designed for any Doctor. And again, I get the inclination from what the producers were trying to do, but it just doesn't work, and it's terrible, and it never should have happened. Even beyond that, you have the opening credits have been changed. It's still the classic Starfield from the entire Fifth Doctor era, actually from the last season of the Fourth Doctor era as well. But now the Starfield has been tinged with a rainbow filter. So in addition to the white stars, there are these green and red prismatic rainbow reflections. And the logo itself is distorted and curved and given another rainbow distortion. And the same thing happens on the end credits. It looks tacky and awful and not clean at all. It's just a terrible opening and closing credit sequence. All of this together presages the rapid decline that's about to happen in terms of viewership and in terms of funding of the show. This has never in the classic era been a well-funded show. It's of course infamous for its wobbly sets and cheap monster makeup, but all of that pales in comparison with what's to come, and it's a real tragedy. Now, as to the Twin Dilemma itself, there was a poll done by Doctor Who magazine back in 2009 when the 200th story aired, and it was a reader poll asking them to rank all 200 stories of Doctor Who. And the story that ranked number one was The Caves of Androzani, which, fair enough. I wouldn't pick that as number one, but I'd certainly pick it close to the top, and it's a reasonable choice. I can see why it won. That is immediately bookended by The Twin Dilemma, which is ranked the worst story of all time. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that, although I can certainly see the arguments. I will always and ever viscerally dislike Planet of Giants as the worst of all time. And I doubt anything will ever shake that opinion of mine. But Twin Dilemma, even if it's not the worst of all time, it's certainly in the very bottom tier. The writing is poor, the costumes are awful, and I'm not just talking about the Doctors. The story is incoherent. It's dull and plodding, and the bulk of the story is the Doctor being completely unpleasant. It is an unlikable story, and it's unusual in being the first story of a new Doctor that's at the end of a season from the previous Doctor. That, of course, happened with the first Doctor into the second, 10th Planet, into Power of the Daleks. But that was back when the show was on something like 50 weeks out of the year, so there wasn't really a feeling of seasons. At this point, the seasons of the show are basically running fall and winter each year, and during this particular era, the show was airing 2 25-minute episodes per week on Thursdays and Fridays. It had been knocked out of its traditional Saturday night time slot several years earlier. And this story marks the end of that era, of the 25-minute episode, 2 episodes a week era. I've got tomorrow 2 more 25-minute episodes that wrap up the Twin Dilemma, and then going into the next season, the series switches to a format of 45-minute episodes. And yes, ultimately during the 7th Doctor era, it will switch back to 25-minute episodes, but it goes back to its Saturday night time slot. So this right here is the show flails around trying to find an audience and regain its footing that never, ever happens. So that's it here, at the beginning of the end. And for me, the beginning of a little over 2 weeks of watching the 6th Doctor and some of my least favorite stories of all time. So, yay! I'll be back tomorrow.